Public hearings on two bills that would raise taxes for high-income households were held in Augusta today. One bill would add a 4% surcharge on Mainers who have a yearly income of at least $1 million. This money would be used to guarantee the 55% of the state's share of education funding, which currently is built into the biennial budget, but there are questions surrounding potential cuts. According to supporters, all Maine people currently making more than $61,000 share the same taxes. No Republicans were listed as sponsors of the bill. They're concerned about increasing taxes on those who make more money.
You punish success, the more you tax it, the more you punish it. Would you rather see people admire those people and look for a way to get there themselves? Or do you feel like we should just keep the poor and keep feeding the poor?
We're facing a budget shortfall, and there's going to be some difficult decisions the legislature has to make, either about making cuts to programs or raising additional revenue. And we really feel that those cuts would have a detrimental impact on Mainers who need support most.
The other bill discussed today in the Committee on Taxation would add an additional tax on capital gains.